The rain fell in relentless sheets against the vast panoramic window, distorting the city lights into a bleeding watercolor of neon and gold. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the cool leather of my brother's sofa, watching the silent chaos unfold outside. Each distorted flare of light was a reflection of the turmoil inside me, a vibrant display of a world that had become unrecognizable. A hollow ache had settled deep in my chest, a cold, cavernous space where 2 decades of my life used to be. The emptiness was an entity in itself, a silent hum that drowned out everything else, leaving me adrift in the quiet wreckage of my own making. My brother sat opposite me, occupying a large armchair with an awkwardness that made the piece of furniture seem oversized and foreign. His hands rested limply on his knees, his posture a testament to his helplessness in the face of my profound grief. He would occasionally murmur words, phrases meant to soothe, but they were hollow sounds that couldn't penetrate the thick fog of my sorrow. They were like stones skipped across a frozen lake, making no ripple, leaving no trace. Meanwhile, tears I no longer felt streamed down my face in silent, steady rivers, carving cool paths on my skin that I made no effort to wipe away. Meanwhile, tears I no longer felt streamed down my face in silent, steady rivers, carving cool paths on my skin that I made no effort to wipe away. Meanwhile, tears I no longer felt streamed down my face in silent, steady rivers, carving cool paths on my skin that I made no effort to wipe away. It was into this tableau of quiet desperation that his wife entered the room, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the heavy stillness of the air. She walked to my brother's chair, placing a hand on his shoulder and leaning in to whisper something that was lost to me. He gave a short, jerky nod, rose from his seat, and cast one last, pained look in my direction before quietly exiting the living room. His departure left a different kind of silence in its wake, one that felt less heavy, less burdened by the weight of unspoken, inadequate words. She did not take his vacated chair or maintain a polite distance. Instead, she crossed the plush carpet, her steps completely silent, and lowered herself to the floor to sit beside me. She was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep in my bones. A delicate fragrance enveloped me, a scent of jasmine and warm sandalwood that was both comforting and subtly intoxicating. She said nothing, simply settling into the space beside me, her presence a quiet anchor in the swirling storm of my emotions. Her hand came to rest on my shoulder, the touch gentle but assured. With a soft pressure, she drew me towards her, guiding my head until it found a resting place against the soft fabric covering her chest. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against my ear, a calm and persistent metronome in the discordant symphony of my grief. It was a sound so fundamentally alive, so peaceful, that it began to slowly, almost imperceptibly, quiet the chaos in my own mind. I closed my eyes, allowing the simple, profound comfort of the embrace to seep into me. I let myself collapse against her, the tension I had been holding in every muscle for weeks finally beginning to dissolve under her gentle hold. My body felt immensely heavy, as if it were made of lead, and I surrendered its full weight to her support. Her fingers began to move through my hair, slowly and methodically, carefully working through the tangles with a tenderness that felt almost maternal. Each slow stroke was a balm, a soothing gesture that seemed to untangle not just the knots in my hair, but the tight, painful knots of anxiety and despair that had constricted my soul. After a time, she shifted, gently guiding me down until I was lying with my head resting in her lap. The position felt one of complete vulnerability, of absolute surrender, yet I felt no fear, only a deepening sense of peace. I gazed up at her, my vision slightly blurred by tears. In the dim light filtering in from the rain-streaked window, her face was a soft sculpture of shadows and light, her eyes dark pools of what looked like pure, undiluted empathy. Her touch shifted then, her fingers leaving my hair to trace a delicate path down the side of my neck. The feathery touch of her fingertips ghosted over my skin, raising a fine tremor in their wake. Her fingers followed the curve of my collarbone, a slow, deliberate exploration that was no longer purely comforting. A different kind of warmth began to bloom beneath her touch, a slow burning ember in the cold ashes of my grief. It was a sensation I had not felt in years, a subtle spark of awareness that had nothing to do with solace and everything to do with a quiet, burgeoning current of something new and unspoken passing between us in the silent, rain-filled night. Her embrace was a cocoon, a fortress against the storm that raged both outside the window and within my own mind. Lying with my head in her lap, I inhaled the subtle scent of her perfume, a fragrance that seemed to anchor me to the present moment, pulling me away from the jagged edges of memory. The steady, muffled rhythm of her heart, which I could feel vibrating through her body into my own, became a lulling drumbeat. This was a sanctuary built of warmth and scent and sound, a place where the crushing weight of my grief was, for a moment, lifted by the simple, profound act of human closeness. Her fingers, which had been a constant, soothing presence in my hair, began a slow descent. They traced the delicate line of my jaw, then moved to the sensitive skin of my neck, each touch as light as a whisper. I felt a shiver trace the path of her touch, an involuntary response that had nothing to do with the cold. Her hand came to rest in the hollow of my throat for a moment before her fingertips continued their exploration, brushing over the fragile bones of my collarbone. The gesture was no longer one of simple comfort. It was deliberate, inquisitive, and it stirred something dormant deep within me. A flicker of confusion, a question of appropriateness, tried to surface in my mind, but it was a weak and distant thought, easily extinguished by the profound sense of peace her touch provided. This felt less like a transgression and more like a deeper form of empathy, a communication that transcended words. In that moment, I craved this connection more than I craved reason or propriety. It was a lifeline, and I clung to it, allowing the warmth to spread through my veins, chasing away the persistent chill that had become my constant companion. She leaned down, her dark hair falling forward like a silken curtain, creating an intimate space just for the two of us. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin an instant before her lips met my forehead. The kiss was incredibly soft, a brief and chaste pressure that was devoid of demand, yet it sent a jolt through my entire system. Her lips lingered there for a heartbeat before beginning their own slow journey, moving from my temple to my cheekbone, each touch a soft punctuation mark on my skin. Finally, her lips found mine. The initial contact was hesitant, a gentle press that was more of a question than a statement. It was a kiss of solace, tasting of her quiet presence and my own salty tears. There was no passion in it, only an infinite tenderness that seemed to flow from her into me, filling the empty spaces with a warmth that was both startling and incredibly welcome. I remained perfectly still, neither responding nor pulling away, my body frozen in a state of suspended disbelief and nascent longing. She drew back almost imperceptibly, her eyes searching mine in the dim light, seeking a sign, a signal. My stillness, my lack of resistance, was the only answer I could give, and it seemed to be enough. She leaned in again, and this time the kiss was different. It was deeper, more confident, a slow and deliberate claiming. Her lips parted mine with a gentle pressure, and her tongue traced their outline before slipping inside to meet my own in a dance that was slow, languid, and utterly mesmerizing. A fire ignited deep in my belly, a slow burning heat that began to spread through every limb, awakening nerves that had long been dormant. My own lips, clumsy and unpracticed, began to respond to hers, moving with a newfound urgency. The grief that had been a suffocating shroud was momentarily burned away, replaced by this overwhelming, immediate sensation. My hands, which had been lying limply at my sides, lifted of their own accord, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of her dress at her hips, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. As the kiss deepened, her free hand continued its unhurried exploration. It slid from my collarbone down over the gentle swell of my breast, the thin fabric of my blouse the only barrier between her touch and my skin. Even through the material, I could feel the searing heat of her palm, and I felt my nipple harden in a purely involuntary response. Her touch was reverent, almost worshipful, as if she were mapping a territory that was both new and sacred. Her fingers found the top button of my blouse. For a moment, they just rested there, a point of focused heat that seemed to burn straight through to my soul. The world outside, with its rain and its blurred lights, ceased to exist. My past, with its pain and betrayal, faded into a distant echo. There was only the sound of our breathing, the scent of her skin, and the overwhelming feeling of being truly seen, truly touched, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. With an agonizing slowness, she began to undo the button. The tiny sound of the pearl slipping through the fabric was deafening in the stillness of the room. It was the sound of a barrier being removed, a boundary being crossed with my silent, breathless permission. A profound sense of surrender washed over me, a letting go of not just grief, but of who I thought I was, and I gave myself over completely to the unspoken promise of what was to come. The kiss ended as slowly as it had begun, a reluctant parting of lips that left the air between us charged and heavy. She rose from the floor in one fluid motion, her grace almost cat-like in the dim, watery light. Reaching down, she took my hands in hers, her grip firm and reassuring, and gently pulled me to my feet. I felt unsteady, my legs weak and trembling, as if I were learning to walk again after a long illness. Leaning on her for support, I allowed her to lead me out of the living room, away from the ghost of my sorrow that still lingered on the carpeted floor. We moved through the quiet hallway to the guest bedroom at the end of the corridor. The room was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. The city's nocturnal luminescence filtered through thin white curtains, painting the space in shades of silver and deep blue. She led me to the edge of the large, neatly made bed, the crisp white sheets looking cool and inviting, a stark canvas against the shadows. She gently pushed me down to sit on the mattress, the slight dip and creak of the springs the only sounds in the silent room. She knelt before me on the plush rug, bringing her face level with my waist. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, held mine for a long, breathless moment before she looked down at her own hands. With painstaking slowness, she began to unfasten the remaining buttons of my blouse. Her fingers were deft and certain, yet they moved with a reverence that made the simple act feel like a sacred ritual. As each button was released, a sliver more of my skin was exposed to the cool air of the room, raising a trail of goosebumps in its wake. Once the last button was undone, she carefully parted the fabric, pushing the blouse from my shoulders. It slithered down my arms and pulled around my hips, leaving me exposed from the waist up in the soft light. I felt a pang of self-consciousness, a long dormant instinct to cover myself, but the look in her eyes banished it completely. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a profound and quiet admiration that made me feel beautiful, perhaps for the first time. She leaned forward, her lips pressing a series of soft, warm kisses along my collarbones, first one side, then the other. Her hands moved to my back, her fingers finding the clasp of my bra with an unerring certainty. A single, practiced movement, and it was undone. She drew the straps down my arms, and the garment fell away, joining my blouse on the floor in a soft heap. Now completely bare to her gaze, I felt a wave of heat wash over me, a blush that started in my chest and spread upwards to my face. She placed her hands on my shoulders and gently pushed me back until I was lying fully on the bed, the cool, smooth sheets a startling contrast against my heated skin. She stood up and, in a single, graceful movement, shed her own silk dress. It slid from her body like water, revealing a silhouette that was breathtaking in the semi-darkness, a figure sculpted by moonlight and shadow. She was perfection, and the sight of her, so confident and so beautiful, stirred a deep, aching desire within me that was entirely new. She lay down beside me on the bed, not touching me at first, just allowing me to absorb the reality of her presence, of her skin so close to mine. Then her exploration began in earnest. Her hands and lips became instruments of discovery, charting every curve and hollow of my body with a slow, agonizing precision that was designed to heighten every sensation. She kissed a path from my shoulder down my arm, her tongue occasionally flicking out to taste my skin, sending shivers cascading through me. Her fingers traced the line of my ribs, danced over the soft skin of my stomach, making the muscles there clench in anticipation. Her mouth moved to my breasts, her lips closing around one nipple with a gentle suction that drew a sharp gasp from my throat. She devoted her attention first to one, then the other, her tongue and teeth creating a symphony of sensations that was almost unbearable in its intensity. My back arched off the bed, my hands fisting in the pristine white sheets as my body responded with an urgency I hadn't known it possessed. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a living, breathing creature of pure sensation, and she was the source of it all. Her journey continued downward, over my stomach, her lips leaving a trail of fire in their wake. She paused at the waistband of my jeans, her breath hot against the denim. My mind screamed for her to continue, to relieve the coiling tension that was building low in my belly. It was a place of pure, unadulterated pleasure, a world where the only language was touch, and the only truth was the escalating rhythm of my own heartbeat, drumming a frantic, primal beat against the cool, white sheets. I was completely lost, adrift on a sea of sensation she had created. The pain that had been my anchor for so long was gone, replaced by a pleasure so intense it was almost a pain of its own. I had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with such focus, such intent, to be the sole object of someone's undivided attention. In her hands, my body became an instrument, and she was playing a song on it that was wild and beautiful and utterly, devastatingly new. The wave of pleasure crested and broke over me, a shuddering release that left me breathless and boneless against the cool sheets. My body hummed with the aftershock, 1,000 tiny electrical currents dancing along my nerves. For a moment, I was adrift, floating in the quiet aftermath, convinced that my body had given all it could. But as my breathing began to even out, I realized she was not finished. Her touch, which had momentarily softened, returned with a renewed purpose, a promise of deeper waters yet to be explored. She shifted her position, moving to lie fully on top of me. Her weight was a comforting, solid presence, grounding me as the last tremors of my climax subsided. Her lips found mine again in the darkness, and this time the kiss was different. It was no longer the gentle, exploratory caress of before. It was hungry, demanding, a raw and potent expression of desire. A fire met a fire, and I responded with a ferocity that surprised me, my hands moving from the sheets to her body, eager to learn her landscape as she had learned mine. My fingers traced the elegant curve of her spine, the dip of her waist, the swell of her hips. Her skin was smooth and warm beneath my touch, a canvas of silk and heat. I felt a surge of power in this mutual exploration, a sense that I was no longer a passive recipient of comfort, but an active participant in this unfolding passion. Our bodies moved together in an unspoken rhythm, a languid dance of shifting weight and sliding skin that created a delicious friction, a building heat that promised another, higher peak. With a strength that belied her slender frame, she rolled us over so that I was now on top of her. The shift in perspective was intoxicating. I looked down at her face illuminated by the soft city glow from the window, her eyes dark and wide with a reflection of my own desire. She guided my hands with hers, placing them on her shoulders, then her waist, showing me without words how she wanted to be touched. I followed her silent instructions, my movements becoming bolder, more confident as I explored the planes and curves of her body. She lifted her hips, a silent invitation, and I understood. My own hands moved with a newfound instinct, tracing the path she had taken on me. I leaned down, my hair falling around us like a curtain, and my lips followed the trail my fingers had blazed. Her skin tasted of salt and her own unique, intoxicating scent. A low sound, a soft moan of pleasure escaped her lips as I rediscovered her body for myself, and the sound was a potent aphrodisiac, fueling my own escalating arousal. She guided me lower, her hands tangled in my hair, not pulling, but gently directing. I found the heart of her heat, the core of her pleasure, and my initial hesitation was washed away by the raw intimacy of the moment. I moved with an intuition I didn't know I possessed, my mouth and tongue learning the rhythm that made her body tremble. The sounds she made grew louder, less inhibited, a beautiful, raw music that filled the silent room and vibrated through my entire being. Her pleasure became my own. The feeling of her body responding to my touch, of her surrender, was an intoxicating thrill. I felt her muscles tense, her breathing hitch as she neared the precipice. I pushed her closer, driven by a desperate need to give her the same release she had so generously given me. Her fingers tightened in my hair as the wave took her, her back arching off the bed in a silent scream of ecstasy that I felt as if it were my own. In the quiet aftermath, we lay tangled together, our bodies slick with sweat, our breathing harsh and ragged in the stillness. I collapsed against her, my head resting on her chest, listening to the frantic drumming of her heart as it slowly returned to a normal rhythm. There were no words, none were needed. We had communicated in a language far older and more profound than speech, a language of touch and breath and shared release. A deep sense of peace settled over me, a tranquility that went bone deep. The frantic, gnawing emptiness that had been my constant companion for months was gone, filled to overflowing with the warmth of her body and the lingering echo of our shared passion. I felt completely sated, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, as if a vital, missing piece of myself had been restored. She had not just offered comfort, she had offered a powerful, transformative healing. Wrapped in her arms, with the city breathing softly outside the window, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I was missing. This was more than just a physical act. It was a profound connection, a moment of grace that had found me in my darkest hour. As my heavy eyelids began to drift shut, my last conscious thought was one of overwhelming, inexpressible gratitude. I had come to this house seeking solace from a broken heart, and instead, I had found a startling, beautiful, and utterly unexpected resurrection. I awoke to a world softened by the nascent light of dawn. The city outside was still quiet, the relentless rain having given way to a gentle, pearlescent haze that diffused the emerging sunlight. I was cocooned in warmth, her arm draped possessively over my waist, her body curled into mine from behind. The slow, even rhythm of her breathing against my neck was a profoundly comforting sensation, a quiet testament to the intimacy we had shared. A deep, unfamiliar sense of peace settled in my bones, a feeling of being perfectly, exquisitely right where I was supposed to be. For a long while, I simply lay there, not wanting to disturb the tranquility of the moment. I replayed the events of the night in my mind, not as a series of distinct actions, but as a continuous flow of sensation and emotion. The memory of her touch, her taste, the sound of her pleasure was branded onto my senses. It was a memory that didn't bring with it shame or confusion, but rather a startling clarity. The night had not been an act of desperation or a misguided attempt to numb my pain. It had been a genuine connection, a raw and beautiful discovery in the wreckage of my old life. Carefully, so as not to wake her, I untangled myself from her embrace and slipped out of the bed. The cool air of the room washed over my bare skin, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the urge to cover myself, to hide. I walked to the large window, the clothes we had discarded the night before lying in soft, intimate piles on the floor. Pushing aside the thin curtain, I looked out at the waking city. The sky was a delicate tapestry of pale pinks and soft grays, and the world below seemed full of a quiet, hopeful promise. A profound sense of renewal washed over me. It felt as though the night had been a baptism, washing away the grime of my grief and the bitterness of my past. I felt lighter, unburdened. The future, which had loomed as a terrifying, formless void, now seemed like an open road, a blank page waiting to be written. I was no longer defined by the man who had left me or the life that had crumbled. In the span of a single night, I had been remade, reborn into a new and unknown version of myself. I turned from the window to look at her, still asleep in the bed. In the soft morning light, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Her dark hair was a wild tangle on the white pillow, and her lips were slightly parted, a faint smile gracing their corners, as if she were lost in a pleasant dream. A wave of overwhelming tenderness and gratitude washed over me. This woman, my brother's wife, had given me a gift more precious than she could ever know. She had not just offered me her body, she had offered me a piece of my own soul back. My gaze drifted from her peaceful face to the nightstand beside the bed. It was a simple, uncluttered surface, holding only a lamp, a glass of water, and her phone lying screen down. It was an innocuous object, a simple piece of technology, but my eyes were drawn to it. In the growing light, the dark, reflective surface of the screen acted as a distorted mirror, capturing a sliver of the room behind me, a sliver that included the bedroom door across the way. And in that dark, distorted reflection, I saw it. It was a detail so small, so incongruous with the peace of the moment, that my brain struggled to process it at first. The bedroom door, which I was sure had been closed, was now slightly ajar, open just a fraction of an inch. And in that tiny, dark gap, I could just make out a sliver of movement, a shape that resolved itself with sickening clarity. It was an eye, watching, unblinking, from the darkness of the hallway. A sudden, violent chill, colder and more terrifying than any grief I had ever known, seized me, freezing the breath in my lungs. The entire, beautiful edifice of the night, the peace, the healing, the connection, fractured in an instant, shattering into a million pieces of ice. The tranquility of the room became a suffocating trap. The intimacy we had shared curdled into something grotesque and performative. It wasn't a connection. It wasn't healing. It was a show. And my brother had been watching. The air in my lungs turned to ice, and the world narrowed to that single dark point in the reflection, the eye. It was unblinking, patient, a silent predator observing its quarry from the shadows. The warmth of the room, the lingering heat of our bodies in the bed, the soft light of dawn, it all became a grotesque illusion, a beautifully constructed stage for a private, perverse theater. My heart, which had been beating with a slow and peaceful rhythm, began to pound against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird trying to escape a cage of bone. Every tender memory from the night instantly curdled, replaying in my mind as a sick parody. Her gentle touch was now the calculated gesture of an actress. Her soft moans were lines delivered for an audience of one. Her comforting embrace was the grip of a conspirator. The profound healing I had felt was a lie, a carefully orchestrated violation that was somehow more devastating than the simple cruelty of my ex-husband's betrayal. I had not been seen. I had been watched. I had not been comforted. I had been used. My gaze shifted from the reflection of the door to the woman sleeping soundly in the bed. The peaceful expression on her face was no longer serene. It was the placid mask of a skilled performer, resting after a successful show. The body that had been my sanctuary just moments before was now the body of my betrayer, an accomplice in my humiliation. A wave of revulsion, so powerful it was physically nauseating, washed over me, and I had to fight the urge to be sick on the pristine white sheets that had been the backdrop for our deception. My limbs moved with a detached, mechanical slowness, as if they belonged to someone else. I bent down and picked up my clothes from the floor, my fingers clumsy and numb. The soft fabric of my blouse felt abrasive against my skin, tainted by the events it had witnessed. Each button I fastened was like sealing a plate on a tomb, entombing the naive, hopeful woman who had existed just minutes before. I moved without a sound, a ghost in the wreckage of a beautiful lie. I walked through the silent apartment, each step an effort. The living room, the scene of my initial surrender, now felt like a carefully set stage, the furniture props in a play of feigned empathy. The very air seemed thick with their shared secret, heavy with a conspiratorial silence that was more damning than any accusation. The window that had shown me a distorted but beautiful city now seemed like a one-way mirror, and I felt a crawling sensation on my skin, as if 1,000 unseen eyes were upon me. Opening the front door was like breaking the surface of stagnant water. The morning air rushed in, sharp and cold against my feverish skin, but it offered no cleansing, no relief. It was simply a different kind of void. Stepping across the threshold, I did not look back. There was nothing there for me but the ashes of a manufactured intimacy and the chilling knowledge of a secret that would forever bind the two people I had trusted. I started walking down the empty street with no destination in mind. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and follow me. The city was waking up, the first sounds of traffic beginning to cut through the morning quiet, but it all felt distant, a world from which I was now irrevocably detached. I was not the same person who had entered that building seeking comfort. That person was gone, and in her place was this hollowed-out shell filled with a cold, hard knowledge. The image of the eye in the dark reflection was burned into my mind, a permanent afterimage I knew I would never escape. It would be there in every dark window I passed, in every mirror, in the screen of my own phone. They had not just taken advantage of my grief, they had stolen something far more precious. They had stolen the possibility of trust, the sanctuary of intimacy, and replaced it with the perpetual, terrifying feeling of being watched.